Hello and welcome back to screenblue.com.
In this lecture, we're going to learn about class variables. In our previous lecture, we learned about the instance variable and the local variables, right? So in this lecture, we're going to learn about the class variable. What is class variable then? Class variable, also known as static variable. Static means it's not change, right? Static means constant, are declared with the static keyword in a class, but outside a method, constructor, or block. Okay, so what that means is just like an instance variable, class variable are also declared outside a class, outside a method, constructor, or a block. Static variable are rarely used in other being declared as constants. Constants are variables that are declared as public, private, final, and static. Constant variables never change from their initial value. Static variables are stored in the static memory. It's rare to use the static variables other than declared final and used as either public or private constants. Static variables are created when the program starts and is destroyed when the program stops. And the visibility is similar to instance variable. However, most static variables are declared public since they must be available for users of the class. Okay. To summarize that, static variables are kind of like a class variables, okay? So you create them just like the instance variable outside the method, constructor, or a block. However, the major difference between the instance variable and the static variables are you can have millions of objects from the class, right? So if you have an instance variable, your instance variable would have millions of different values. However, a class variable is different. So you can only change one time, and that variable, that value is going to be same throughout the class. It means your class variable value would be same for millions of objects. Okay, so that's the difference between class and instance variable. Okay, so that's why you normally want to use this static variable if it's like a constant. So give an example in here. So I've got this class here, class variables, and I've got this name and address. Okay, I know this is a static variable because it has this word static, right? We learned in our method with return types lecture where if you have a static, that means it's a static method, right? Just like that. If you have a static in your variables, that means that is the class variable. Okay, so I've got this name and address, right? So I've got another class here, static class variables. Okay, so in this main method here, what I did was I just changed it to class variables.name, right? So here, one the other advantage of using class variable is that you do not have to create any objects. So I just say class variables and .name because I've made this static and it's public. That means I can have access to this outside the class. Okay, so normally all the class variable are declared public. Okay, most of them are declared public. So now I have class variables.name equal John. So I changed it here, right? Then I also changed to address to this value, 1212 California, Richmond, VA. So now I can access that in class variables.name, class variables.address. So now they are both static. That's why I have access to them outside this class here. So I've got this different class from this class, right? The reason I have access to that without creating an object is because they are class variables or static variables. The one disadvantage, or I would say drawbacks of this class variables is because, let's say I created millions of objects, right? Okay, I created millions of objects for this class variables. Now, if I call that class variables.name, it's going to be John for all millions of objects, which might not work in your case, right? You wanted to have a different name for each object. Each object, let's say you have a student class and you created a millions object, right? That means you have millions of students, right? And millions of students have different names. In that case, you would not want to use class variables. You'd want to use instance variable, right? However, static variable or class variable are important if your variable value does not change, right, throughout the class. It's same throughout the class. So now if I run this, I'm going to get John, right, and this class variable that address, I'm going to be 1212 California Avenue, Richmond, VA. So here, as you can see here, the advantage of class variable is that I do not have to create an object, right? I can just call class variables.name, class variables.address. Next topic is constants. So constants are the variables that is permanent or immutable. Static variables are kind of like constants, right? But you can change the value, right? Once you change it, that value is going to be the same throughout the class unless someone changed it. So that value is like static throughout the class. However, the constant is kind of like a static variable. However, the constant's value does not change. You cannot change the constant value, and they're always written in uppercase. Okay, just to differentiate from other variables, constant are always written in uppercase, and always denoted by final return type. So we learned about return type, right? What void, integer, string, and so on. So constant have this final return type. Give me an example in here. I've got this class constants, and here I've got this name, okay, public static string name, and I've got this public static final double, okay, pi equal 3.14, and you can see here this is a static variable, okay, it's in lowercase, right? I know this is the constant because it's in uppercase. You see here this name of this variable is in uppercase, and it also has this final keyword. So now I have another class here, constant method. Now if I have this main method here, I did constant.name, okay, equal Dan. So I'm going to say constant.name, it's going to give me Dan. Okay, so now here I already declared this pi as 3.14. Then I can just say constant.pi, it's going to give me 3.14. So now if we try to change it here, constant.pi equal 3.12, the Java is going to throw an error because it's the constant and you have set it final. That means you cannot change it. Once you have a keyword final, that means you know that that's a constant. So now we learn what those constant and the class variable is. So now I'm actually going to create a class here. I'm going to call it static variables. Oops. Static variables. So in here, I'm actually going to create two static variable. I'm going to call it public static string, okay, name, public static string address. And let's just call it class, and I'm actually going to say class static variables method, and in here I'm going to do public static void main, and here args that, and in here I'm actually going to say static variables dot name equals, let's say Danny, and here so static variables dot address equals 1212 California Avenue, Richmond, PA 22601. So now if I do system out.println, so I'm going to do static variables dot name and system.out println static dot address. All right. So here you see that I got this static variables and I changed it here, right? So now my static variable name is Danny and my static variable that address is this 1212 California Avenue. Now let's change this one again to, let's say, John, and let's say 22. Let's make this Tyson's, and let's say make this one change to, let's say, 2. So now if you print this one out again, right? So now my here I've got this static variable name and address, then I changed it to Danny and 1212 California Avenue. I got this one here. Now I changed this variable to John, right? So let's say some programmer wanted this name and address to be this one, but someone changed it, right? Now you're expecting this Danny, now you got John, right? That's why it's very, very crucial, and you need to understand in order to use the static variables. Once you change it, right, it's going to override your previous value. That's why you would see a lot of people using instance variable. Okay, static variable, you use it in a meeting where you're gonna have the same value throughout the class. So that is kind of like a static variable. Let's see, let's try to do this one here. I'm gonna call this one static, and let's say double balance. So now if I do this system.out.println, say if I'm gonna have that balance in here, and I'm going to say this balance equals 2.14, let's say 2500, and I'm going to say it static variable that balance, and you can see that I was able to get the balance as well. Okay, so you don't have to put public, but normally when you create a static variable, you'd see people using public, because that static variable is going to be the same throughout the class, right? Which means that, if you're going to use static variables, you're expecting to use it throughout the program. Okay, and that means you're going to have to put it public. So that is kind of like a static variable. So now let's actually create a constant here. So I'm going to say constant, and here I'm actually going to create a public static string name, and I'm going to say public static. Okay, this constant always going to be public and static. Okay, so I'm going to say it double pi equal 3.1. So the pi value is always going to be 3.1 for blah blah blah, right? But let's say that it's going to be 3.1 for our whole application. So pi value doesn't change. So in that case, you can actually create a constant. So I know this is a constant because it is an uppercase, okay, and it has this final return type. So now if I create this method here, constant method, and I'm going to call public static void main string. All right, so here I'm actually going to do constants.name equal, let's say, Kevin. So now if I do constants.pi equal 3.12, let's see what happens here. So it says here that make pi not final. So when you have make it final, right? Once you have it final, you cannot change it. It's throwing an error here. So if I run this, it's gonna say you cannot assign a value to the final variable pi, right? So you cannot change it. I was able to change the name, right? It's just static, right? It means you can change it, but it's gonna override the value, and you're gonna have the same value Kevin throughout the class unless you change it again, right? However, you cannot change this value pi, this variable pi, because it's the constant. So now if I print this, constants.name, and I'm going to say that constants.pi, and you can see that it's going to say Kevin and 3.14. Right? So now, public static, right? The constant would always have return type final. It will always be static. Okay, that means you can use throughout the class, and you can use whatever return type you want. Okay, so this pi is has a decimal, so I use double. It's going to be public because you're going to use that throughout your application. So that's it for this lecture. I will see you guys in our next lecture.